Afternoon, everybody. So my name's Anthony Spiteri. I'm the lead infrastructure architect at Zetagrid, a vChampion and a vExpert. And I'm going to talk to you guys about differentiating or dying in the cloud. So interestingly enough, this title has changed since the initial go-between, which was basically talking about the elephant in the vCloud. But with the recent announcements on the weekend about the vCloud Air network, I've taken a little bit of a softer approach on VMware's attitude to service providers, and in fact very happy. So now what I'm aiming this talk about is basically talking about how service providers can fight the fight against the bigger guys, the AWSs and the Azures. So a little bit about myself. I'm a service provider lifer, so I've been lucky enough to work in service providers all my life. I've worked in an ISP, which became an ASP, if you guys remember what ASPs were. Moved on to hosting, software as a service, and then also went through managed service providers, and where I sit now in an infrastructure as a service type of provider. And where we go to next, don't know, but the evolution hopefully continues to traject. I focus mostly on hosted exchange and CRM, and also a little bit of SharePoint in the old days. Cut my virtualization teeth on Hyper-V. Don't hold that against me, but that was what it was, being a Microsoft fanboy. But then I discovered ESX, vSphere, and leading into vCloud. One of the other great things about the VMware community that I was able to be brought into was the great passion that's there, and through that obviously the vExpert came along, which leads me to being the lead architect for Australia's biggest vCloud powered provider, which is now part of the vCloud Air network. So, in my old days as an ASP/hosting provider at a company called Your ASP, I mainly worked on hosted exchange systems and CRM systems, partnering very closely with Microsoft. I wonder if you guys remember BPOS when it first came out. So obviously when BPOS first came out, which is the precursor to Office 365, 3, 2, 1, whatever it's up to at the moment, don't know. We took that as a bit of a front. All of a sudden, Microsoft, who are partnering us massively, giving us a lot of help, all of a sudden we're pushing customers that were normally going through us into their cloud. So at TechEd 2010, I was at a service provider dinner with a bunch of other providers, and the guy that led the service provider partnership in Australia basically told us that we need to differentiate or we're going to die. And it wasn't so much a question, it was more of a statement. Which made me think, probably not then, but a few years later, so what's the value proposition of SaaS? And look, for me, it's obviously OpEx, it's utility based, it's driving the lowest dollar for the most service that you can get. That sort of also made me think that SaaS, is there any room for SaaS in the industry? Probably not. SaaS, as you know now, probably is a dying breed. You've got your Azures, you've got your Google apps, you've got your Salesforces. So smaller SaaS companies effectively are dying out. That leads to infrastructure as a service and now platform as a service. And traditional providers is their space in the industry. So I'm not too sure if you guys have seen Demolition Man, but in Demolition Man there's a great Taco Bell analogy when it comes to monopolies. Basically Taco Bell ended up winning the fast food wars, and every fast food store was Taco Bell. So looking at that, I think about these guys, you know, AWS, I think about Azure specifically. And make no mistake, these guys want to monopolize the market. They want to take every single bit of the pie that they can. They don't care about partners either. So moving forward, in trying to work out how service providers can actually try and differentiate and stay relevant, I think of an analogy. And a few years ago I was down south I'm come from Perth, Western Australia, as you could tell with the accent, and we've got a really striving wine industry over there. It's a bit like the Napa Valley, but without the earthquakes, so we're pretty cool there, it's pretty straight. For decades there was established big companies. You could almost equate those to your IBMs and your HPs and your traditional providers. But 10 to 15 years ago there was a whole slew of new providers that came out, small guys doing their bit. And while there was an initial hit to the providers, the impact was minimum. So the big providers were still prevailing, still getting all the business. What then happened was the smaller providers started to differentiate their product set. They started to go into ports, liqueurs, they started to distill beer, offer whiskies, jams and the like. But ultimately what that meant was that we had a diluted marketplace full of average product. And what that meant for the larger guys was that they still were attracting tourist dollars, mainly because they were still big, they were still nasty, and they still had the marketing power, much like the big guys today. The smaller players were still there, but certainly it was all about the niche market. So how does that translate to cloud? So with all that threat that came along and being part of an industry that had been full with partners, the big guys were supporting us, we were trying to get out there to clients, and all of a sudden we've got these big guys stealing clients away from us. There was a massive race to differentiate. I saw it in a number of different industries that I worked in, and also personally with the companies that I was a part of. What this led to though was a loss of focus and a loss of core competency. Effectively, these service providers decided to become jack of all trades and masters of none. But what that means is when you do that, you're going to be fighting because your resources that you've got, you're never going to get to compete with an Amazon or an AWS, a Google. It's impossible to do that, and your resources are not going to be there. So what this means, if you're going to differentiate into lots of products, you're going to thin out your product set, your brand's going to become impacted, and you're going to lose your credibility, which obviously leads to a loss of customers. So how can you survive the threat? My thing is to look at your core competencies. Do what you do well, really well. So I'm also a firm believer of limiting your product set to something that you do well and playing to your strengths. And you really shouldn't try to keep up with the big boys. It's okay to try and look at them and see what they're doing, but ultimately, as I said before, you're not going to be able to keep up with them. With that though, you can work to complement and extend your core services with the big boys. As an example, you might leverage some of their products as an extension of your own products. So, a little bit of a takeaway before I finish. No need to take the differentiator die message literally. I feel that it's been created to perpetuate an aim for service providers to lose focus and to think, well, if we can't beat them, we might as well join them. Focus on being excellent at what made you strong in the first place. And a quick analogy of that is to look at the company that I work for, Zetagrid. We do vCloud services. We're the biggest service provider, again, in Australia when it comes to vCloud. But we do virtual data centers really well. We do allocation model really well. There was there was a sort of move to go to consumption-based, but we said, no, let's keep it allocation, and it works well. So my thoughts are, ultimately, if you do your stuff well, there's enough pie out there for everyone, and everyone can succeed. The key is reputation, and through that, you'll be able to serve a proven track record. Thank you very much.